I was gonna say, would you say then like the black swan offense change your perspective of risk, and it
should, but it doesn't. I think I think, look, it's not taking things for granted. I think people just move on. When things happen, if it doesn't impact them significantly, like it does impact you at a point in time, but if it's not a long-term impact, people just move on. Like COVID, for example, we had lockdowns, we had lockdowns, we had businesses closed down. Now, people that weren't impacted by it, in fact, some people, and I'm not going to say benefited from because that's the wrong way to say it. Some people, like work from home became a thing. That became a huge benefit for people that, it proved that you don't actually have to be in the office 5 days a week. You can do your work remotely, right? But what about those parents that have kids that have speech issues? What about those parents that have kids that unfortunately have a poor reading level? What about the person that lost his entire business, his livelihood? So I think it's a bit of a balanced approach, and I don't mean a balanced approach in a negative way. I think people that aren't impacted by it tend to move on from it and aren't really then prepared. Whereas people that are still impacted by it, I think that's where the growth comes from. It's like, okay, well, this has happened. I need to sort of, it helps, it's an opportunity to grow, but it comes at a cost. Do you know what I mean?
That's really well put.
Yeah. So I still think a lot of people, majority of people just move on. Like, I mean, if you look at it, people going on night outs now and dinners or whatever it is, like the social life is sort of back in a way. Like you wouldn't have thought 4 years, like look at Vivid. It's packed to the brim at the moment for such a poorly executed show. Looking at you, Sydney, New South Wales government. But it's such a, like, now you've got crowds of people. Who would have thought you've got to socially distance, remember? The 1.5 meter rule, the 1 meter rule. How ridiculous. Anyways, let's shift this a bit. There's a lot of concepts of why people aren't prepared for the next Black Swan event. And I think Taleb goes into some key points here. Do you mind stepping through those and let's discuss it a little?
Yeah, like I think like what Taleb says is that it's very unpredictable. So most people wouldn't plan for it. Or they wouldn't even consider it.
Yeah, you plan for a world war. Yeah. It's like those people in America that plan for like doomsday preppers. They build like underground bunkers and things like, we're ready to go to war. Like civil war or something, or, I think that's on the extreme end of prepping though, personally.
I mean, if you can afford it. But
do it. Yeah,
but as I said, right, you don't want to limit your life to the point that you just become a paranoid freak. Everything, there's a conspiracy behind everything, and there's you just think about the pessimistic view of everything. Like if I cross this road, there's a 10% probability of me like passing. I must not cross this. I must levitate or float.
I'll just stay inside.
That's what I mean, right? You don't want to paranoid your life, so you just want to be very careful with how you navigate around that. But yeah, like he basically says that part of it is like limited understanding of probability, like probabilistic thinking, and he argues that we tend to underestimate the likelihood or potential impact of rare events. Like we sort of diminish it, and especially like the second order consequences that it could have. Like even with COVID, right? The immediate consequences was like everyone was obviously like physically couldn't meet up and all those things, and it's impacted work. But then because so many businesses were out, they had to then stimulate the economy. So that required a lot of money printing in the short term. Now we're experiencing the effects of that, right? Everything's becoming expensive.
Inflation.
Exactly. And that's because of just the decisions that were made at that time for short-term gratification, I guess, for short-term benefit. Gratification. But for short-term benefit for businesses being able to run and stimulate them and keep them going up, came at the cost of now everything becoming more expensive. So that's like, I guess, an example of second order, those decisions that were made. And And yeah, like we may not recognize the potential of black swan events, especially those that don't fall under normal circumstances, and that's why we don't prepare for it majority of the time. Like when you also look at plans, right? It's always looking at perfect conditions, like, and it's like, and if you think about it, they're all interlinked. Like if this condition is good, then this will be good. This will be good. This will be good. It's like there's so many assumptions. Remember how we went over assumptions at the beginning?
Yep.
When you start a business or whatever it is, there's so many assumptions of everything going well. But what happens when one thing doesn't go well? The entire plan is now, because it's based upon assumptions that everything is well and good, it's mapped around that. Then it becomes, if one thing goes out of the window, now the entire plan's failed.
Yeah.
But we always plan and prepare for success.
Yep.
But we never think about the risks and most of the time, risks and like what happens when it doesn't actually occur.
Yeah, I think the idea that all these preconditions need to be met in order for success is such a typical way to do things. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like in order to have success, you've got to take 5 different steps that are the preconditions. For these preconditions to be successful, no one thinks of the risks of that not being successful. So that's interesting. I think if you went to someone right now and said, the limited understanding probability. If we said, in the next 2 years, there'll be a nuclear warfare and America will go into civil war and we're going to go into World War III. It seems like it's a bit probable with everything that's happening in the world at the moment. But I think 5 years ago, if you said that, you get laughed at. 2020, if someone said that, you'd be like, no way. So you're right. I think it's a point in time, different experiences and what's happening. But I think, like I said before, there's so many things that are happening right now that we're not really thinking of or missing. And we're really just trying to go, I think another thing is we just don't want to think about it too much as well.
That's where it's like the sense of security.
Yeah.
Like we just want to feel like everything will go well. No worries. Like it just happen. We just think about it when it happens. But then when it does happen, it ends up becoming more devastating than we actually think. Than what we initially thought of. And it becomes overwhelming. And actually that's on the next point as well, which was like the false sense of security. Where it's based on assumptions and which is what he emphasizes, which was like that we can predict and control the future. And that's like a fallacy as well, right? Because we think we can control a lot of things. But the truth is, the actual truth is you can't control anything other than yourself. The decisions you make and the things that you do is the only thing you really have control over. Everything else is like a byproduct influence out of what you can around yourself, basically. I can't control your behavior. I can't control how you're going to react. You might flip this table. I can't control that. You might, and I can influence it, right? I can say like you shouldn't do that and put boundaries and stuff, but then I still can't control you.
Yeah, the false sense of security is a good one.
And I think like
a lot more common in privilege areas, I would say. Would you agree?
Sorry, what was that?
A lot more common in privileged countries, cultures, I would say.
Yeah,
because there's no instincts for survival. Everything's perfect. Everything's just zen.
That too, and like also because of tech, right? We outsource a lot of our decisions through tech as well. Like,
what do you mean by that?
Like as in, I don't have to really like with news or like with information gathering. It's just recommendations. I just go on YouTube. It's just all recommendations I get. I just click on the one that looks the most, that has a good thumbnail, good title, and that's it. I don't really have to ever really think. Like when I go on social media, oh wow, it appears like my shopping cart, like the stuff that I wanted to buy just appeared. I don't have to evaluate as much. Or like even the news that I receive information from, I'm not thinking about, like, is this like objective or is this because of what I watch? Is it reconfirming my biases of what I usually end up watching? Or is this like we don't put ourselves in that frame of critically evaluating, thinking like what the information we're actually absorbing. Like when I go on my YouTube versus your YouTube, it's gonna be completely different. And it's like if I'm into that frame of thinking, like whether I'm liberal or whether I'm conservative person, right? I'm only gonna get that recommendation to me consistently over and over again on YouTube, or unless I actively go out of my way to search the other end of the story.
Wow.
So it's like that. I think that like with tech, it then gives you like this false sense of security, right? Because your information is also biased, especially when you use like recommendation algorithms. But yeah, and then it takes like one little thing to then completely like change your entire worldview.
You've literally blown my mind there. I never thought of it that way. That our algorithm controls a lot of that, and that's where we get our sense of security from. And
Like to a certain extent, yeah.
And also this critical thinking element of it. Because I think the biggest thing is people don't critically think.
Yeah,
And so when you're just fed information, you're like, yeah, I'll absorb this without actually thinking of why you're absorbing this.
and it's like you're also getting confirmation bias as well. Because you're just searching up stuff that you, like, I'm trying to think of something, like the best example.
I think the best example is like political sides, for example, or, you know, in political ideologies, whether it's war, whatever side, whatever view you have, that gets confirmed innately over and over again because that's what the algorithm
pushes onto you. And it's
Yeah.
also you searching it as well. Like, you're trying to find the flaws of the other side of it.
Yeah.
And then you're just searching up in recency bias. You're just searching up the recent cases that were like very bad examples of you, because you're looking up with confirmation bias that they actually corrupted, they're wrong, blah blah blah. You're searching up with that intention. That's what you're gonna get. And now your algorithm is only gonna just push that type of news, and that's how, and you know that leads to problems as well, a lot of problems. But that's with like politics and stuff, and that can be with other views of the views of yourself in the world as well. When you apply it that way, it's like that can lead to really a false sense of security a lot of the time, because the algorithm with what your belief is, what you're searching up, you're just trying to find confirmation bias and with an availability bias, like information that's easily available to you as well, that is accessible, and then that ends up really actually amplifying your sense of security. And you associate with those groups of people, you have conversations around those people, you have friends around those people, and it just makes you more and more, I think it makes you very, very, and that now touches on the next idea, which is fragility, which is like
Fragility.
fragility of systems, basically.
Okay.
Because now your entire, you could say, environment supports everything that you view and think. It's like it's only until you come across a single event that completely contrasts or contradicts with your views that everything's like falsified. So it's like fragility of systems is basically like one catastrophic events completely destroys and wipes the entire it wipes it out completely. You can think of it like stock markets. It's very fragile. One Elon Musk tweet completely either pumps or dumps the stock, or either
Shiba Inu, right?
or
That's his
crypto.
one.
Yeah, basically, right. So that's a good example of a fragilistic type of system where a small single tweet, a small single sentiment from someone, or a small little action can completely have a significant impact on, and it's not just experienced by the individual or the company, but by groups of people, or globally even experienced.
Kind of tells you how influential things are and how much it's not actually based on facts, let's say, or theory, right? So, but it's actually based on emotions and the reaction to those emotions. Because I think that's what the media, any mainstream media, emotions, right? It gets the most views, it gets people talking, it gets people riled up. Elon Musk, for example, one tweet can shock the entire crypto market. I think the Ethereum ETF got approved or something.
Yeah, it has.
And that, of course, like obviously there's implications, theoretical, but you saw the impact it had on the crypto market for a bit. The Bitcoin ETF getting approved had an impact as well. So I think the world is a lot more complicated than we think it is. And our minds and the way we do things are a lot more complicated. Because if everything was based on theory, we wouldn't be existing.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you know what I mean? If everything was just theoretically, yes, the hypothesis is that if things are run the way they should be, it should just be the way it is.
Like linear, I guess.
Exactly. But it's like a very thing, or it's exponential or whatever it is. It's not as linear, like you said. Yeah, perfectly said.
Yeah, definitely. And so it's like there's a lot of interconnectedness as well. Like with like stock market or really anything. And like it doesn't just affect that one part of the system, but affects the entire system as a whole as well. So yeah, fragility of systems is like black swan events. In a way, black swan events sort of expose the fragility of a system. Because like if your system is down, like if your entire thing is like destroyed from a black swan event, a collapse, then it just shows like your method of thinking or like the way you do things or your business or whatever is just fragile. It just took a single event to basically wipe all the 20, 30, 40 years of success or 10 years of whatever it is. Your thing is gone from just like a single event.
Because you're not prepared either.
You weren't prepared, yeah. So it's like, that's why, yeah. And then we'll talk more about this later on, but that's where the concept of anti-fragility comes in.
Okay.
So a bit of a tease.
What's the last one?
Yeah, so the last one he argues, is like the narrative fallacy. And I think you talked about this at the beginning.
I did, yeah.
Which is like that we have a
Complete
tendency.
fluke, by the way. I didn't know this was here.
Yeah, amazing. So you probably read about a bit of his book, but he says that we tend to, as you said, like we create narratives and there's explanations for those things that we think about. And that's what the conspiracy theories and everything comes out of as well. And we try and rationalize like the black swan events, even when sometimes it's not even like it doesn't really make sense for why it should occur as well. But yeah, he's just saying like how we rationalize black swan events as like something that's foreseeable. Like, oh yeah, it was planned, it's predicted. It's because of XYZ. And based on just the information that was available at the time. But that leads to like a false sense of understanding and confidence in our ability to predict the future. Because we're like, oh, it's predictable. Like I knew this was coming. Now it's like, oh, now I can predict the future type of mentality. And yeah, that's what narrative fallacy is basically.
So the thing is, the most dangerous thing about narrative fallacies, it's the when it comes from very smart people will try to make a narrative to fit what happened. And then that narrative, when it's said with confidence and a bit of conviction, and even if it sounds 50% believable, it just goes down a completely different rabbit hole. Which is, I think it goes back to the fact that we're a lot more complicated than we seem it. Like the world is a lot more complex. I know we say the world is simple, it's actually not. I think it's a very, very complex place to navigate, because you've got 8 billion people, you've got all this psychology, you've got all these beliefs, you've got all these religions, you've got all these political ideologies, you've got all these different circumstances, you've got all these different environments, different weather, different we also circumstances, but people living in very different ways of life, that you can't actually generalize all of that into one simple way, because the impacts of everything has a domino effect differently on other people.
Yeah, and what you just spoke of was basically touching on the concept of complex adaptive systems, which I'll talk more about on the next one, because that relates more with anti-fragility. But it basically talks about the idea of how the world and everything has a lot of complexity behind it because of the interconnected relationship between events and situations and things and people.
Yeah, I think the moment emotions get involved, things change a lot. And I think people have realized that there's ways to exploit that now. right? I think 50 years ago, you wouldn't think that you could exploit emotions. Actually, you know what? I think you can. I think if you looked at some of the things that have happened, yeah, I take that back. I think everyone, since the start of time, people have known that touching on emotions is very important to get a reaction.
Yeah, but now it's like more amplified, I would say, because of technology and like media. It's a lot easier to amplify people's emotions with narratives to make them feel a certain way. And it's not just in the tech and algorithms, it's like even in the language that they use. Which is actually a bit interesting as well. Like certain verbs that are used can completely change your view or like completely change your view of that memory. And there's actually like an experiment that was done about like car crashes. So they had like I forgot what study it was, but it was like basically had a group of people where they just witnessed car crashes, right? Just simulating that experience. And then they were then asked after, like, and they use different verbs. They asked like, what did you remember seeing when you saw the cars crashed versus when the cars were smashed versus when the cars bumped into each other. And what was surprising was they all had completely different answers based on the verb that was used. When they heard the word smashed, they said glasses were shattered. They were going like 50 Ks or 60 Ks per hour or something. The bumpers were completely destroyed or something. Whereas when they said bumped, it was like, oh, like it was just, there's like a bit of a bump. Like there was no glass shattering or anything. And they all witnessed the same event. But like because of the verb that was used, completely distorted, like the brain completely distorted what they remembered. Yeah.
Wow.
I know, it's crazy.
Just based on a verb.
Yeah, based on a verb that they use. So that's why I'm like I'm pretty sure cops and stuff, probably know some tactics, but it's why you got to be very mindful of
the verb
languages,
that's being used. Yeah,
verbs that they use. Because if they do articles, right, and if they say stock market crashed versus like stock market dropped, completely different reaction, completely different views. Crashed is a very strongly negative connotation word. When you think about crash, you're thinking about like collapse. Whereas when you think about like dropped, you're just like, oh, it's just a dip. No worries. It's a dip. No worries. We'll skyrocket day after. But you see how like that's just like language.
Interesting.
So when you read articles, like with the titles, that's how they do it. They nudge. It's called nudging as well. They try and push you to a certain type of view about something.
Where do you find these studies?
Just reading. just read it on the internet sometimes. Just watch random videos and you get ideas and just go and think.
That's fascinating. The verb you can use can dictate. Wow.
Yeah. So when you have dialogue and conversations with people, just be mindful of how you're wording things, because then it can completely change their view of what you're saying. Yeah,
that's true. I think we'll wrap up here. I think we've touched on, what black swan events are, some of the examples of black swan events, why we're not prepared for the next black swan events, what are the impacts of black swan events, both good and bad. But any final words?
No, I think we went over a lot of content. And I think the main thing is just with black swan events, you want to just be able to consider them and be able to just take some actions to just prepare if it does happen. But also not be to the point where it just makes your life paranoid. It limits your present, you living in the present. So you don't want to create anxiety and paranoia, but you just want to be able to understand that there's a probability of it happening. And if it does happen, how can I be content with where I will be if it does happen? I think that's the way I'll just summarize it.
Perfectly said. Thanks for Sif. Thanks for listening, everyone. Please like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on our socials, Instagram, TikTok, and give us a follow on the streaming services that you may be listening on.
Yeah, thanks, Drift. Thanks, everyone. See you guys on the next one.
Thank you.